We often talk about immigration's impact on an economy, but today we're diving into a 400-year story of how immigration wasn't just a feature of the Canadian economy, it was deliberately designed to build it. From the very first trading posts to today's massive cities, we're going to explore the economic strategy behind it all, based on one incredible historical analysis.
So, how are we going to tackle 4 centuries? Well, we've broken this massive journey down into 4 key chapters. We'll kick things off with the colonial foundations. Then we'll follow the push to build a nation westward. After that, we dive into the modern metropolitan era, and we'll finish up by looking at the core challenge Canada is facing right now.
Okay, let's start with this quote because it really gets to the heart of the whole story. The big idea here is that immigration wasn't something that just happened to Canada. Nope. It was the actual tool used to construct the entire economic system from the ground up. So let's rewind all the way to the beginning, the colonial period. For the first 250 years or so, the name of the game was simple: numbers. The whole point of immigration was just to get people on the ground to establish a real, lasting demographic footprint, first for the French and then for the British.
And this whole early era, it really hinges on just a few key moments. You've got the founding of Quebec as this tiny trading post. Then you have state-sponsored programs like the Fees du Roi, which were literally designed to grow the population. And then boom, major world events like the American Revolution and the Irish Famine kick off the first true waves of mass migration.
And to give you an idea of just how fragile this whole enterprise was, get this, by 1663, after more than half a century, there were less than 3,000 Europeans in all of New France. The economy was really built on the fur trade with indigenous nations, not farming settlements. So growth was slow, and it was all clustered right there along the St. Lawrence River.
So where did the first big population boost come from? Well, you might be surprised. It was the American Revolution. Somewhere around 40 or 50,000 loyalists, folks loyal to Britain, headed north. They settled in the Maritimes, of course, but critically, they also set up brand new agricultural communities in what would eventually become Upper Canada. This wasn't just about adding people. They basically laid the economic groundwork for modern Ontario.
All right, let's jump forward in time to the next huge phase. After Confederation in 1867, immigration becomes the absolute engine for this grand nation-building project. The goal? Settle the massive Western territories and finally link the country from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
And the game plan for all of this? It was called the national policy. It's a pretty brilliant 3-part strategy if you think about it. First, you put up tariffs to protect your new factories in the East. Second, you build the Canadian Pacific Railway to move people and goods. And third, you use that railway to bring in immigrants to settle the prairies. They then grow grain to export and buy all the stuff made in those eastern factories. It was a perfect loop.
And you know what? It absolutely worked. The end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century saw this incredible flood of people from all over the American Midwest, Ukraine, Poland, all across Europe. They turned the prairies into a global breadbasket. The analysis is clear, though, that this whole expansion relied on land that was ceded through the numbered treaties with indigenous nations. But this whole boom wasn't exactly a smooth ride. The immigration policy became what economists call pro-cyclical. What does that mean? Well, basically, the government would throw the gates wide open when the economy was booming and then slam them shut when things went bad, like during the Great Depression. The problem was, this often made recessions even worse, because you were cutting off new people and new demand right when you needed them most. Then, after World War II, the whole engine just roared back to life. You had displaced people and refugees from a war-torn Europe coming over, filling huge labor shortages in Canada's booming factories. This influx fueled a massive expansion of manufacturing and the growth of suburbs, really cementing Ontario's place as the industrial heart of the country. And that brings us to the modern era, which really gets kicked off by a massive policy change, one that would completely redraw Canada's demographic map and, with it, its entire economic landscape. So what was this game-changing policy? The 1967 points system. And this was a huge deal. For the very first time, Canada officially got rid of an immigration policy that was based on where you were from, which, let's be honest, heavily favored Americans and Europeans. Instead, the focus shifted to what was called human capital. It became an objective system where you got points for things like your education, your language skills, and your profession. And the result? Well, you can see it right here. It was a total transformation. The point system blew the doors open to large-scale immigration from every corner of the globe. You started to see these major new flows of people coming from Asia, the Caribbean, and Africa, and it completely changed the face of Canada's cities.
But this new wave didn't just change who was coming, it changed where they were going. Immigration became intensely urban. In fact, more than 80% of newcomers started settling in just 3 cities: Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Now, this created these incredibly powerful economic engines. It's the magic that happens when you get a ton of smart people and businesses in one place. But it also planted the seeds for future problems, putting a ton of pressure on housing and infrastructure.
But, challenges started to pop up, especially around getting foreign credentials recognized. So in the 2000s, the strategy shifted again. The focus moved toward what's called two-step immigration. The idea was to give preference to people who were already here, working as temporary foreign workers or studying as international students. Their Canadian experience was seen as a much better predictor of their long-term success.
Okay, so this whole long, winding history brings us right up to today and to the massive economic debate that Canada is right in the middle of. And it's a direct result of these more recent policies. I mean, just take a look at these numbers. It's staggering. In 2023, Canada's population grew by 3.2%. That's nearly 3 times the historical average. This kind of population shock, which was mostly driven by a huge increase in temporary residents, has created a brand new set of economic puzzles to solve.
Now, all this growth is great for the overall size of the economy, but it's put an incredible strain on the country's ability to absorb everyone. And the biggest pressure point, the one everyone feels, is housing. The CMHC even put out this pretty shocking warning, saying we need to basically double the pace of home building just to get back to the affordability we had a few years ago.
And this right here is the fundamental trade-off that the analysis points to. It's the central dilemma. On one hand, you have the scale of the economy. More people means a bigger total GDP, a bigger market. But on the other hand, you have the standard of living, or GDP per person. And if you don't have enough housing, infrastructure, and business investment to keep up with all those new people, individual prosperity can actually go flat or even drop. So when you pull the camera back and look at the whole 400-year picture, you start to see these big themes emerge again and again. First, people have always moved to where the economic opportunity is, from the rivers to the prairies to the big cities. Second, immigration has always been an economic multiplier. Third, the settlement of the West was built on the dispossession of indigenous lands. And finally, the big constraint today isn't a lack of people, it's a lack of housing and infrastructure to support them. So yeah, the story of Canada's economy and immigration, it's definitely not over. It's being written as we speak, as the country tries to figure out how to match all this growth with the capacity to handle it. Which, of course, leaves us with a question for you. What complex topics should we tackle next? Let us know what you think in the comments.